The house felt different the moment he left. Not empty, just quieter in a way I wasn't used to. My husband had gone on a 4-day work trip, something we'd both been planning for weeks. I'd insisted I'd be fine on my own. I was 38, not a child, and we lived in a safe suburban neighborhood where nothing ever happened. Still, when his car disappeared down the street, the silence settled in heavier than I expected. That first night alone, I followed my usual routine on autopilot. Dinner around 7, a shower by 8:30, one lamp on in the living room, none upstairs. I liked keeping the house dim at night and made it feel calmer, less exposed. Outside, the backyard was nothing but darkness. Trees along the fence line blocked most of the moonlight, and we didn't keep a light on back there unless we needed it. By 10, I was curled up on the couch with a blanket, half watching a show I'd already seen. The rain had started earlier, light but steady, tapping against the windows in a way that was almost soothing. I remember thinking how quiet everything felt, how rare it was to have the house entirely to myself. Around 10:47 p.m., I heard something behind the house. It was faint, a soft sound, like metal brushing against metal. I muted the TV and listened, my heart picking up speed. The sound didn't repeat right away. I waited, telling myself it was probably the wind, or rain hitting something just right. Our backyard gate was old and rattled sometimes. I unmuted the TV and tried to relax. A few minutes later, it happened again. This time, I knew exactly what it was. The back door handle moved. Not violently, not enough to make noise inside the house, just a careful test, like someone gently checking if it would give. I sat up straight, the blanket sliding off my lap. The rain outside masked other sounds, but I was sure of what I'd heard. My heart thudded in my chest as I stared toward the dark hallway leading to the kitchen and back door. I didn't move right away. I told myself there was an explanation. Maybe I hadn't locked it properly earlier. Maybe the pressure change from the weather caused it to shift. Anything that didn't involve someone standing in my backyard. I waited. Nothing else happened. After about 30 seconds, I stood up slowly and walked toward the kitchen, staying close to the wall, careful not to turn on any lights. I stopped a few feet from the back door and listened. The house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the rain outside. I checked the lock. It was locked. I let out a shaky breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding and told myself I was overreacting. I walked back to the living room, sat down, and turned the volume up slightly on the TV, trying to convince my body to relax. At 11:06 p.m., my phone buzzed. The sudden vibration made me jump. I picked it up, expecting a message from my husband checking in. Instead, it was a text from an unknown number. "You're still awake." My stomach tightened. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. I typed back, "Wrong number." The reply came almost immediately. "Sorry, just figured you'd be up since the lights are on." I glanced around the living room. Only one lamp, curtains drawn. From outside, the house shouldn't have looked occupied at all, at least not from the back. I didn't respond. I locked my phone and set it face down on the table. Then I heard it again. The back door handle. This time, it moved just a little longer. A controlled, patient motion, like whoever was touching it was listening for a reaction. My phone buzzed again. "Did you hear that?" My hand started to shake. I stood up slowly, backing away from the kitchen entrance, my heart racing. I typed, "Who is this?" The typing bubble appeared, disappeared, then appeared again. "Someone making sure you're alone." The words made my chest tighten painfully. I turned off the living room lamp, plunging the house into near darkness, and moved quietly toward the stairs. As I reached the first step, my phone buzzed again. "You don't need to turn the lights off." That was when fear really set in. I locked myself in the bedroom, turned on the lamp there, and sat on the edge of the bed, listening. My phone buzzed again. He usually leaves on Tuesdays. My breath caught. I hadn't told anyone about my husband's schedule. I hadn't posted about it. I typed, "Leave me alone." The reply came slower this time. "I'm not trying to scare you." Another message followed. "I just wanted to check something." "Check what?" Downstairs, I heard a faint sound through the rain. Footsteps on wet grass. Slow, careful. They stopped near the back door. My phone buzzed again. "You locked it this time." I slid off the bed and crouched beside it, my phone clutched tightly in my hand, every nerve screaming at me to stay quiet. I realized then that whoever was outside wasn't in a hurry. They weren't trying to break in. They were learning. And the scariest part was knowing this wasn't random. Someone had chosen this night, chosen me, because they knew I was home alone. I stayed crouched beside the bed long after the footsteps stopped. My phone felt heavy in my hand, the screen dark now, but I couldn't bring myself to put it down. The house was too quiet. The rain outside had softened to a drizzle, each drop hitting the ground with a dull, steady rhythm. I strained to hear anything over it, movement, breathing, a door opening, but there was nothing. Minutes passed, then more. I slowly stood up, my legs stiff, and moved closer to the bedroom door. I pressed my ear against it, listening. Silence. No messages came through, no sounds from downstairs. I told myself maybe it was over. Maybe whoever it was had moved on once they realized the door was locked. Then my phone buzzed. "You're waiting." My heart dropped. I typed back without thinking, "What do you want?" The reply took longer than before. "Nothing." Another message followed. "I already checked." "Checked what?" The question echoed in my head as I stared at the screen. Before I could respond, another message appeared. "You don't have an alarm on the back door." My breath caught painfully in my chest. That was true. We'd talked about installing one, but never got around to it. I felt exposed in a way I hadn't before, like the walls of the house were thinner than I'd believed. I whispered to myself, "Call the police," even as my hands shook too badly to do it. I didn't want to overreact. I didn't want to explain something I couldn't prove. But the feeling that I was being evaluated, that someone was taking mental notes, was overwhelming. Downstairs, the back door handle moved again. This time, it didn't stop right away. It turned slowly, carefully, until it met resistance. The sound was faint, almost polite, but unmistakable. Whoever was outside wasn't testing anymore. They were confirming. My phone buzzed again. Still locked. Tears blurred my vision. I finally dialed 911, whispering as soon as the dispatcher answered. I told her everything, the messages, the handle, the footsteps. She told me to stay upstairs, lock myself in, and not make any noise. Officers were on the way. As if on cue, my phone buzzed again. "You didn't have to do that." Another message followed almost immediately. I was going to leave. I squeezed my eyes shut, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. The handle downstairs stopped moving. I listened, counting my breaths. Then I heard footsteps again, retreating across the wet grass. Slow, unhurried, like there was no rush at all. The dispatcher stayed on the line until the police arrived. When they finally knocked at the front door, I nearly collapsed with relief. I unlocked the door with shaking hands and let them in, my voice breaking as I explained everything again. They searched the yard with flashlights, checking the fence line, the gate, the area around the back door. Nothing. No footprints clear enough to follow, no damage to the lock. One officer pointed out faint smudges on the back door handle. "Someone touched this," he said, "recently." They took my phone, photographed the messages, and asked about my routine, when my husband traveled, when I usually went to bed, what lights I kept on. Answering those questions made me feel sick. I realized how much of my life followed the same pattern every night. "There's no forced entry," one officer said carefully, "and no direct threat, but this person knew you were alone." He paused. "That's not random." After they left, I didn't sleep. I sat upstairs with every light on until morning, replaying the night in my head. When my husband called from his hotel, I told him everything. He offered to come home early, but I told him not to. I didn't know why. Maybe part of me didn't want to admit how unsafe I felt in my own house. 2 nights later, I found something outside the back door. It was small, easy to miss, a folded piece of paper tucked between the door frame and the siding. I noticed it only because I was checking the door obsessively now. My hands shook as I unfolded it. 4 words. "You reacted quickly." I felt cold all over. We called the police again. They took the note, dusted for prints, and told us the same thing they had before. Without a threat, there was little they could do. We installed an alarm system that week. Motion lights, cameras. I changed my routines. I stopped keeping the same lights on at night. Nothing else happened after that. Months passed, then years. But sometimes, when I'm home alone and the house is quiet, I think about that night, about how careful the movements were, how patient. Whoever it was didn't need to break in. They didn't need to hurt me. They just needed to know how I would respond. And that knowledge that someone out there learned my fear, my habits, my reactions, is something I've never been able to fully shake. Because the scariest part wasn't that someone tried the back door. It was that they left knowing exactly what they needed to know. The night it started, nothing felt unusual. I was home alone because my partner worked the late shift twice a week, something he'd been doing for over a year. By now, I was used to those nights. I actually liked them sometimes. The apartment stayed quiet, no conversations drifting from room to room, no TV noise competing with my own thoughts. Just me, my routines, and the soft hum of the building settling around me. I was 33, living on the second floor of a small apartment complex just outside the city. Not isolated, but not busy either. Most of my neighbors kept to themselves. At night, the parking lot emptied quickly, and the building took on that hollow, nighttime stillness that made even familiar sounds feel different. That night, I came home around 7:30 p.m., cooked dinner, and ate at the kitchen counter while scrolling on my phone. By 9, I turned off most of the lights, leaving only a small lamp on in the living room. I always did that. One lamp meant enough light to feel comfortable without advertising that I was awake. Around 9:50, I locked the door, checked it twice without thinking, and settled onto the couch. A show played quietly in the background, something I'd already seen, just noise to fill the silence. I remember feeling relaxed, safe, normal. At 10:12 p.m., my phone rang. I glanced at the screen. Unknown number. I let it ring. It stopped after a few seconds. I went back to watching the show, barely registering it. Unknown calls happened all the time. Spam, robocalls, nothing worth worrying about. Then it rang again. Same number. I sighed, annoyed now more than anything, and answered. Hello? There was no response. Not silence exactly, just the faint sound of breathing. Slow, controlled, like someone holding the phone very close to their mouth. Hello? I said again, louder this time. The breathing continued for another second, then the call ended. I stared at my phone, my pulse quickening. I told myself it was a prank, someone bored, someone who dialed the wrong number and thought it would be funny. Still, I locked my phone and set it face down on the table, suddenly aware of how quiet the apartment felt. Less than a minute later, my phone buzzed with a text. You're still watching TV. My stomach tightened. I picked up the phone slowly, rereading the message to make sure I hadn't imagined it. I typed back, wrong number. The reply came almost instantly. Sorry, just figured you'd still be awake around this time. That phrasing bothered me. Around this time, like it wasn't a guess, like it was an expectation. I didn't respond. I blocked the number and set the phone down again, telling myself that was the end of it. It wasn't. A few seconds later, my phone rang again. Different number, same ringtone. I didn't answer. I watched it vibrate on the table until it stopped. Then another text appeared. Blocking me doesn't change your routine. My heart started pounding. I stood up and turned the TV volume down, listening. The apartment was silent. No footsteps in the hallway, no voices outside. I walked to the window and pulled the curtain back just enough to look down at the parking lot. A few cars sat under the dim security lights. No one was standing near the building. My phone buzzed again. You usually finish your show at 10:30. That wasn't something someone could guess. I watched the same episodes on the same nights. I realized then how predictable I'd become, how comfortable, how careless. I typed, "Who is this?" The typing bubble appeared, disappeared, then appeared again. Someone who pays attention. My hands began to shake. I turned off the lamp, plunging the apartment into near darkness. Only the TV glow remained. My phone buzzed almost immediately. You don't need to do that. I felt a wave of nausea. I moved toward the bedroom, my steps slow and quiet, and locked the door behind me. I sat on the edge of the bed, my phone clutched tightly in my hand, trying to breathe without making noise. Another message came through. You always go there when you're nervous. Tears stung my eyes. I typed, "Leave me alone." The response came slower this time, measured. "I'm not trying to scare you." Another message followed. "I just wanted to see if you'd notice." Notice what? Before I could type anything else, my phone rang again. I didn't answer. Instead, a voicemail notification appeared almost immediately. Against every instinct I had, I pressed play. At first, I didn't recognize what I was hearing. Then, my blood ran cold. It was my TV, the same episode, the same dialogue. Underneath it, faint but unmistakable, was the sound of my breathing. The voicemail ended abruptly. My phone buzzed again. See, I felt dizzy, I didn't know how they'd recorded it. I didn't know how close they were. I only knew this wasn't someone guessing anymore. This was someone watching. From the living room, I heard a faint sound. Footsteps, slow, careful. Not inside my apartment, but close, very close. My phone buzzed again. Don't open the door. That was when I realized how wrong everything was. The calls weren't random. The messages weren't jokes. This wasn't someone trying to talk to me. It was someone making sure I understood exactly how visible I was. And whatever was happening hadn't reached the worst part yet. I didn't move after that last message. I stood in the bedroom with the lights off, my phone glowing faintly in my hand, listening to the quiet. The footsteps I'd heard earlier didn't come closer, but they didn't move away either. It was like someone had decided to stand still, just long enough for me to question my own senses. My phone buzzed again. You're holding your breath. I exhaled sharply, pressing my hand to my mouth as if that could stop the sound from reaching anyone else. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it might give me away. I typed back, "What do you want?" The reply came slower than before. "Nothing from you." Another message followed. I just needed to know. Know what? The question echoed in my head as I stared at the bedroom door. I realized then that the calls weren't about conversation. They weren't even about fear. They were about confirmation. About checking whether the version of me this person had built in their head matched the real thing. I backed away from the door and crouched beside the bed, my phone pressed against my chest. I told myself to call the police. I told myself this was enough. But some small, stupid part of my brain kept whispering that I didn't have proof, that I'd sound dramatic, that I'd be wasting their time. That was when the front door handle moved. It wasn't loud, it wasn't aggressive, just a subtle click, like someone gently testing it to see if it would turn. My stomach twisted painfully. I stared at the bedroom door, imagining the hallway beyond it, the living room, the locked front door separating me from whoever was out there. My phone buzzed again. Locked. Tears blurred my vision. I finally dialed 911, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. I whispered to the dispatcher, explaining everything in broken sentences, the calls, the messages, the voicemail, the handle. She told me to stay where I was and not to open the door. Officers were already on the way. As if they knew, my phone buzzed again. You didn't have to do that. Another message followed almost immediately. I was already leaving. The handle stopped moving. I listened, my heart racing, as footsteps retreated down the hallway outside my apartment. Slow, unhurried, like there was no rush at all. The dispatcher stayed on the line, her calm voice the only thing keeping me grounded. When the police finally knocked, I broke down before I could even unlock the door. They searched the apartment, the hallway, the parking lot. No one was there. No suspicious cars. No neighbors who'd noticed anything unusual. One officer examined the front door closely and pointed out faint smudges near the handle. "Someone touched this recently," he said. "Hard to get prints." They took my phone, photographed the messages, and listened to the voicemail. One of them shook his head slowly. "This person knew your routine," he said. "That doesn't happen overnight." They asked if I recognized the number. I didn't. They asked if I'd noticed anyone watching the building recently. I honestly didn't know. After they left, I didn't sleep. I sat in the bedroom until morning, every light on, replaying the night over and over in my head. I realized how much of my life followed the same pattern every evening. Same arrival time, same lamp, same show, same silence. I'd made myself easy to learn. I didn't stay in the apartment after that night. I packed a bag and stayed with a coworker for a week, then another. I changed my phone number, deleted my social media accounts, and stopped posting anything that could hint at my schedule. I stopped folding laundry at night. I stopped leaving the TV on. I stopped being predictable. For a while, it felt like it worked. 3 months passed without incident. No calls, no messages, no strange sounds at night. I moved into a different building across town, one with better lighting and cameras. I told myself it was over, that whoever had been watching me had moved on. Then, one evening, my new phone buzzed with a voicemail notification from an unknown number. I stared at it for a long time before pressing play. There was no voice. Just silence, not dead air. Real silence, the kind that only exists late at night when the world is asleep. Underneath it, faint but unmistakable, was the hum of an appliance. A refrigerator. My refrigerator. The voicemail ended abruptly. I sat there in the dark, my heart pounding, realizing something that made my skin crawl. The calls hadn't been about scaring me. They'd been about proving a point, about showing me that distance didn't matter, that changing numbers and addresses didn't erase the habits someone had already learned. I didn't call the police that time. I didn't know what I could say that I hadn't already said before. Instead, I turned every light on and stayed awake until morning, listening to the quiet. Nothing else happened after that. No more calls, no more messages, no more voicemails. But even now, years later, I still think about how calmly that night unfolded, how controlled it all felt. Whoever was watching me never needed to come inside. They never needed to confront me face to face. They just needed me to understand one thing. Being home alone doesn't mean you're unseen. The first night it happened, I convinced myself it was nothing. I was home alone because my sister had taken my kids for the weekend. It wasn't unusual. I was 39, recently divorced, and slowly getting used to the quiet that came with living on my own again. The house was small, one story, tucked into a quiet neighborhood where most people knew each other but didn't talk much. At night, the street emptied early. Porch lights went dark, curtains closed. Silence settled in like it belonged there. That Friday, I followed my routine exactly the way I always did. Dinner at 7, dishes washed by 8, one lamp on in the living room, none in the hallway. I didn't like bright lights at night. They made me feel exposed. Outside, the front porch was completely dark. The bulb had burned out weeks ago, and I hadn't replaced it yet. Around 9:40 p.m., I heard a soft sound near the front of the house. Not a knock, not footsteps, just a faint scrape, like something brushing against concrete. I muted the TV and listened, my heart picking up speed. The sound didn't repeat. I waited for a few seconds, then longer. Nothing else happened. I told myself it was probably a stray cat or the wind catching something on the porch. I unmuted the TV and tried to relax. 10 minutes later, I heard it again. This time it was closer, right outside the front door. I sat up straight, the remote slipping from my hand onto the couch. The sound was subtle but deliberate, like something being set down gently. My first instinct was to ignore it. Opening the door at night felt like a bad idea, even in a safe neighborhood. Still, curiosity crept in alongside the fear. I stood up slowly and moved toward the door, careful not to turn on any lights. I checked the peephole. The porch was dark, empty, nothing visible except the outline of the railing and the faint glow of the streetlight at the end of the block. I locked the deadbolt again, even though it was already locked, and stepped back. That was when my phone buzzed. The sudden vibration made me jump. I looked down at the screen. Unknown number. You can look now. My stomach dropped. I reread the message, my pulse racing. Look at what? I typed back. Wrong number. The reply came almost immediately. No. My hand tightened around the phone. I didn't respond. Instead, I opened the camera app connected to the small door camera I'd installed after the divorce. The feed was grainy, but clear enough to show the porch. There was something there. A small object sitting directly in front of my door. My heart began to pound. I zoomed in as much as the camera would allow. It looked like a folded piece of fabric, or paper. I couldn't tell in the darkness. It hadn't been there earlier. I was sure of that. My phone buzzed again. I didn't want to scare you. I sat back down on the couch, my legs shaky. I typed, "Who are you?" The typing bubble appeared, disappeared, then appeared again. "Someone who noticed you're alone tonight." The words made my chest tighten painfully. I turned the phone face down and stared at the front door, suddenly aware of how thin it felt, how close the outside really was. After a moment, I picked the phone back up. "Why did you leave something on my porch?" I typed. The reply came slower this time. "So you'd know I was there." I swallowed hard. I didn't want to open the door. Every instinct told me not to. Still, I couldn't stop myself from standing up again and peering through the peephole. The porch was still empty. No movement, no shadows. Just the object sitting there, exactly where it had been before. Another message appeared. "It's not dangerous." I laughed quietly to myself, a shaky sound that didn't feel like laughter at all. Of course you'd say that, I thought. I didn't respond. I pulled on a jacket, unlocked the door just enough to reach down, and grabbed the object quickly, slamming the door shut and locking it behind me. My hands were shaking as I carried it into the living room. It was a scarf. Mine. The one I'd worn earlier that evening when I took the trash out. I stared at it, my mind racing. I was sure I'd hung it on the hook by the door when I came back inside. I hadn't dropped it outside. I would have noticed. My phone buzzed again. "You forgot that." My heart raced. "How did you get it?" I typed. The reply came almost instantly. "You left it on the hook." I felt cold all over. That meant they'd been close enough to my door to see inside, close enough to reach in when I wasn't looking. My phone buzzed again. I just wanted to return it. I backed away from the coffee table, the scarf slipping from my hands onto the floor. "Leave me alone," I typed, my fingers trembling. The response came slower now, measured. "I will." Another message followed. "I just needed to know you noticed." I didn't reply. I locked every door, turned on every light, and sat on the couch until my eyes burned from staring at the front door. Nothing else happened that night. No more messages. No sounds on the porch. No movement on the camera feed. The next morning, I checked the footage again. At 9:38 p.m., my porch was empty. At 9:41, the scarf appeared. No one entered the frame. I called the police. They took a report, checked the area, and told me what I already suspected. Without a threat, there wasn't much they could do. They suggested better lighting, cameras, changing routines. That night, I replaced the porch bulb. I told myself that was the end of it. But deep down, I knew something had shifted, because someone out there hadn't taken anything from me. They'd given something back, and that felt far more unsettling. I didn't sleep that night. Even after I turned on every light in the house, even after the porch light finally worked again, my body refused to relax. I sat on the couch with the scarf folded neatly on the coffee table in front of me, staring at it like it might move on its own. Every sound made me flinch, the refrigerator clicking on, the house settling, a car passing far down the street. The porch camera feed stayed open on my phone until morning. Nothing else appeared. No movement, no messages, no sign of anyone returning. That silence felt intentional, like the end of a sentence left unfinished. The next day, I retraced every step I'd taken the evening before. I remembered hanging the scarf on the hook by the door when I came back inside. I remembered locking the door. I remembered checking the porch once before settling in for the night. At no point had I left the scarf outside. That meant someone had come close enough to my door to see it, close enough to take it, and close enough to return it later without being seen. I called the police again, hoping maybe now it would sound more serious. The officer who came listened patiently, took photos of the scarf, and reviewed the camera footage. He shook his head slowly. "They know where your camera can't see," he said. "That's the concerning part." He suggested motion lights, trimming the bushes near the porch, and staying with someone for a few days. There was no direct threat, no crime technically, just proof that someone had been there. That night, I stayed at my sister's house. For the first time since the divorce, I realized how deeply I'd grown used to being alone and how unsafe that comfort could be. At my sister's, surrounded by people, I still couldn't relax. I kept checking my phone, half expecting another message to appear. Nothing did. I moved back home 2 days later, telling myself I couldn't run forever. I installed brighter lights, added another camera angled differently, and started locking the screen door as well as the main one. I changed my routine. I stopped watching TV in the living room at night. I stopped leaving anything by the door. For a while, it worked. 2 weeks passed without incident. No messages, no objects on the porch, no strange sounds. I started to believe it had been a one-time thing, someone passing through, someone bored, someone who decided to move on once they got a reaction. Then, one evening, I came home from work and froze in my driveway. The porch light was on. I was certain I'd turned it off before leaving that morning. I stood there for a long moment, my heart pounding, staring at the house. Nothing else looked disturbed. The door was closed. The windows were intact. I told myself maybe I'd forgotten. Maybe I was letting my fear rewrite memories. Inside, everything looked normal. I checked the camera footage immediately. At 6:12 p.m., the porch light was off. At 6:18, it turned on. No person entered the frame. No shadow crossed the porch. Just light where there had been none. That night, my phone buzzed. Better lighting. My hand shook so badly I nearly dropped it. I typed, "Stop." The reply came slower than before. "You changed things." Another message followed. "I wanted to see if you noticed." I didn't respond. I turned off the phone and sat in silence, my heart racing. Nothing else happened that night. No knocks, no sounds, no movement outside. The next morning, I found something else on the porch. This time it was small, easy to miss. A single glove. Mine, the one I'd worn that morning while scraping frost off my windshield. I stared at it, my stomach twisting. I hadn't dropped it. I would have noticed. I didn't pick it up. I left it there and drove straight to the police station. This time, they took me more seriously. They reviewed the footage again, spoke to neighbors, checked for recent incidents in the area. No one had seen anything. No similar reports, no suspects. I moved again, a month later. New house, different part of town, closer neighbors, better lighting. For a long time, nothing happened. Life settled into a new routine, one I tried very hard to keep unpredictable. Almost a year passed. Then, one night, as I was locking my door before bed, I noticed something on the hook by the door. My scarf. The same one. I stared at it for a long time, my mind racing. I hadn't worn it that day. I was sure of it. My heart pounded as I checked the locks, the windows, the cameras. Nothing looked disturbed. No alerts. No footage showing anyone entering the house. My phone buzzed once. "You're careful now." That was the last message I ever received. I never saw anyone. I never found another object outside my door. Nothing else happened that could be proven or explained. But I stopped hanging anything by the door after that. I stopped assuming that locked doors meant safety. I stopped believing that being home alone meant being unseen. Because the scariest part wasn't that someone took my scarf. It was that they brought it back. And that meant they knew exactly where I lived every time.